Okay, why don't we get started? It's 6:31. Good evening, Mount Vernon.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Good evening, Mount Vernon. Thank you all for joining us for this information session this evening. I am so pleased to be able to host this panel discussion. We have a distinguished group of panelists with us this evening who will share some information with us relative to what's happening across our area regarding COVID, our plan to reopen, and I will have them introduce themselves momentarily, but just to give you a backdrop for the context of our conversation this evening, we are planning, like most districts, we are planning to reopen. I have appointed an ad hoc committee that is working to develop a series of recommendations that they will present to me, and I will ultimately share with our board, and that will govern when and how we reopen. But to help inform the work of that committee and the members of our community, I have asked these folks to join us this evening who graciously accepted my invitation, folks that I have grown to respect tremendously as we have navigated our way through this pandemic as public educators. These are folks who have been extremely responsive to my queries. They have responded when I was faced with matters that were beyond the scope of my expertise. I've been able to rely on these folks to provide guidance. So I am honored that they, particularly given the scope of their duties and responsibilities, I am honored that they accepted my invitation. So without further ado, we will begin by introducing our panelists, and then I will get into the discussion. A stranger to no one is our Director of Facilities and Logistics, Mr. Michael Colicchio. And I will ask the rest of our panelists to introduce themselves in no particular order, but I will start with Dr. Hewlett.
Yes, good evening. My name is Dr. Dial Hewlett. I'm honored to be here. We're certainly all committed to trying to maintain the health of everyone in the community, and we're very interested in the health and welfare of the students and the teachers in the city of Mount Vernon, and I'm happy to be part of this panel.
And your position, Dr. Hewlett?
Yes, I am a medical director at the Westchester County Department of Health. I'm also adjunct associate professor of microbiology and immunology with New York Medical College.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Wong?
Hi, my name is Dr. Ada Huang. I'm with the Westchester County Health Department. I'm actually the deputy commissioner here, and I'm responsible for all the communicable diseases, including COVID. And similarly, one of my responsibilities over the last several months has been a point person for all of the K through 12 schools in Westchester County. So as Dr. Hewlett said, we are very interested and committed to the schools being safe and the schools being open, frankly, for in-person instruction. So I am both an internist and an infectious disease specialist, as is Dr. Hewlett, by the way, by training. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Dr. Lynch.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Dr. Richard Lynch here. I am a certified industrial hygienist and consultant to many districts throughout the New York and New Jersey area. I'm a former professor of industrial hygiene and public health at Rutgers University's School of Public Health, and I hold a PhD in public health. We've been working with the district as well as several others in issues related to air quality, ventilation, and the other sort of building related issues that are necessary to reduce the risk of COVID spread.
Thank you. Dr. Ma. You're muted, Dr. Ma.
Hi. I am the medical director of Mount Vernon District, as well as Southern Westchester BOCES. By training, I'm a pediatrician, and I hold an MD degree from Harvard, trained at Bellevue, NYU, and did a specialty in development and behavior at Albert Einstein.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Glazer?
Dr. Hamilton, thank you so much for the invite. My name is Joseph Glazer. I am actually Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Community Mental Health here in Westchester County. Tomorrow will be 1 year that I got a phone call and was asked by the county executive to help to supplement the administrative staff at the Westchester County Department of Health. And I have spent the last year, and although it has been at times harrowing, it has been a privilege to work with the school districts and to work with yourself, Dr. Hamilton, and all of the medical professionals at the Westchester County Department of Health as we have maneuvered our way through this pandemic. So my current role, I guess I'm here in my role as the team leader of the county's school reopening work group.
Thank you so much. And of course, no stranger to the group is Rick McCormick, who is the district clerk and our communication liaison for the district. So we do have many questions that have been submitted in advance. I will try to cluster the questions because we clearly will not get to every single question in the time we have. We have about almost 80 questions that have been submitted. Some of them are redundant in nature, so I will try to cluster them. So let's begin by, I'll share a couple of things with our listening audience, and then we'll get into responding to some of the questions. So the district is interested in reopening. We are interested in reopening because kids should be in school. Schools are by far the safest place for children to be. And our goal is to do that in the most effective, efficient, and healthy way as possible. But I do think it is important to point out, and this kind of gets to some of the questions that were presented early, and I think we should just put this out there at the top of this conversation. There is no way we will be able to make a decision that will be acceptable to everyone. So clearly, our parents and community members will be divided on whether or not we should open. That's one. Two, there is no way we can, as a school district, guarantee that when students come in school, there will not be a COVID case. It's impossible. We can't guarantee that any more than Starbucks can when you go into Starbucks, or when you go into Stop and Shop. They can't guarantee you that you won't get COVID. We can't guarantee you that you won't get COVID there. What we can tell you is that we will listen to the advice of the experts and be informed on how to mitigate potential contamination and infection in our school district with safety precautions that we know and understand based on available research and guidance today. So with that being said, one of the first things that I want to do is ask Dr. Ma to share some of her data relative to the current infection rates in our region. And we'll be brief on this so that Dr. Ma, just so that you know, Dr. Ma, as the district medical director, we communicate often. She shares data with me, and that is often the foundation for many of the decisions that we have made in the district relative to when we've closed, when we've opened, precautions that we've put in place, how we've addressed issues with parents and staff. So Dr. Ma, please, if you will just share some of your data. I don't know if you have your charts or Rick, who's gonna share the charts?
Rick has my charts.
Okay.
You know, I don't have the data for Mount Vernon itself, but I follow both Bronx and Westchester, and you can see yellow is Bronx, and you can see that the numbers are basically going down. I mean, it goes up a little, it goes down a little, and the positivity rate is derived daily from the number of positive, COVID positive tests compared to the number of people tested. So, you know, it's positive over the number of people tested. And it has ranged from about 8% to sometimes 3-something%, and it hovers around 5 or 6%, which is much better than it was before. I mean, I'm only giving you 2 months of data, or actually a month and a half of data, because it's just too tedious to look at the entire year. when the pandemic, happened, I decided that the only way that I can find out how things are going is to follow the numbers daily and weekly. And I report weekly to Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Gayon. And I have data all the way from last March until now. So things are definitely looking much better. We have some questions, of course, between the vaccine and the variants. So all these are unknown. I mean, every day is a bunch of unknowns, and we try to give our best guess, and we try to keep everybody as safe as possible.
Great.
That's
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'd like to address is the issue of the vaccine. So I've received several questions about the vaccine. I've had conversations with people about the vaccine. Some folks obviously are very, have tremendous trepidation about taking the vaccine. Other people are anxious to get the vaccine. What can you share with us, Dr. Hewlett, relative to the safety of the vaccine and advice and guidance for who should be vaccinated?
Yes, I'm happy to do that, Dr. Hamilton. There are now 3 vaccines which are available for use. The third was just approved over the last couple of days. 2 of them are what we call messenger RNA vaccines, and they are from the Pfizer BioNTech company, and the other is from the Moderna company. And the third that was just approved is from the Johnson & Johnson Janssen Vaccine Division company, and that is what we call a viral vector vaccine. The bottom line of all of these vaccines is that they are very effective. The effectiveness rate ranges from 85% to over 90%, probably close to 95% for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. They are extremely safe. Here in Westchester County, we have been involved with mass vaccination programs, and we have had an extremely good experience in the administration of the vaccines. And we feel that it is really very important for everyone to avail themselves to taking these vaccines. Everyone should realize that the Pfizer vaccine is approved only for individuals 16 years of age and older, and the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines are only approved for individuals 18 years of age and older. And so at this time, none of the vaccines that are available are approved for use in children. And so most of the conversation will have to center around the vaccination of adults. And it is our hope and expectation that children will be protected by herd immunity as a result of the adults being vaccinated. And the hope is that within the next several months, that there will be approval for children down to age 12.
Great, thank you. For the record, I have been vaccinated. There's a lot of rumors, and it does vary. So there's clearly going to be some variation in terms of how people react to the vaccination. I've had both doses. My first dose, I was very sore. My arm was very sore. My second dose, I expected the worst. And literally all I had, in fact, I had less reaction to the second vaccine than I did the first. The soreness did not last as long. I had a mild headache that lasted for a day, and that was it. So it does vary. I've heard of people being very sick from it, and other people having no reaction. Has there been any change in the guidance regarding the length of quarantine for people who are on a contact list of an infected person? Dr. Wong, would you like to take that?
Sure. So the current guidance is once you are exposed to somebody else who's tested positive for COVID, the current guidance is for you to be excluded from school or work and to basically be subjected to quarantine for 10 days. Originally, when the guidance came out last summer, it was 14 days, but then it's been reduced after review by the CDC and looking at the data. The guidance is now 10 days after you've been exposed to somebody who's been infected.
Great. Thank you. We are very interested in getting people vaccinated, people who are interested in being vaccinated. We cannot mandate that, of course, but I encourage folks who are interested in being vaccinated to do so. Slots are becoming more readily available. It is not as arduous of late as it was even 2 weeks ago. So if you are interested in being vaccinated, there are some sites that are available to you, which I have posted, and I'll continue to post it that you can access that. So one of the questions that we have is, will there be student tested for COVID via cohorts when testing rotates through the cohorts over time? Meaning, as we phase students back in, and it is our plan, unless the committee recommends something different, to phase students back in, will there be COVID testing? I don't know how readily available the testing kits are for that purpose. I certainly think it offers some degree of comfort to parents to the extent that we can test students at least randomly. In the beginning, there were clusters, and districts were designated in certain clusters based on the infection rates, and there was mandated testing to go along with your designation. That language has since changed. So there was a question that was posed, will the district keep its promise to test students? We never made that promise. What we've said was we would certainly, if we became designated as a red, yellow, or orange zone, we would certainly comply with the testing in order to keep schools open, which is no longer the case at this point. How readily available at the county level are COVID tests for this purpose to school districts?
Ada, if you want, I will take that. I'll just tell you a little bit about how that process works. New York State has been providing what we call surveillance tests, which would be the ones that are used in schools. So we are limited largely by what New York State has provided to us. We've gone through a large number of them, and we also have reached out to the state to see if more will be provided. But at this point, we really can't answer on behalf of the state how many more or if many more will be provided for us for that purpose.
Okay, great. We're very concerned to know if the district has taken into consideration that most of us, the parents, will not be vaccinated very soon, since we are not considered in the list of priority for vaccination at this stage. That's a genuine concern, and that is one that I understand. Parents have to make a decision about what's best for your families. We are going to put parameters in place that are consistent with CDC, and generally, the CDC guidelines are accepted by the state, and then the counties accept them from the state. Am I saying that correctly, Dr. Wong?
Well, not exactly.
Okay, good.
It's a little bit complicated. So I said I should go back to my elementary school civics class, which I don't remember very well. But the CDC, for the purposes of issuing guidelines, they are the federal government, and they are just that. They are guidelines. They actually carry no legal authority. Each of the 50 states has to issue its own, regulations, laws, and decide what it is that they want to follow. And as you noted, I think most of the time New York State does adopt the CDC guidelines, but that is why some of you probably noticed, like earlier this year, when you asked me that question about the quarantine, CDC came out with some guidelines saying it could be shortened, but as you all know, it remained 14 days for longer in New York. And that's because we needed New York at the state level to decide, whether or not to issue those. So the county actually really doesn't have much jurisdiction or authority. We are subject, just like all of you, all New York State entities are really subject to the guidance and the regulations and the laws at the state level.
Great. Another question related to the vaccine is, what is the efficacy of the vaccine as it pertains to the mutations that have been identified and will be identified?
This is an excellent question and an important question. We don't have all of the answers right now. What we do know is that the current vaccines seem to be effective against the variants. However, there is study that is ongoing, particularly with this South African variant, to try to determine whether efficacy is being maintained. Part of the good news, I think, is that there is close monitoring of these strains, and the companies are actively engaged in looking at this and trying to determine if they need to develop boosters or if they need to develop vaccines that are what we call bivalent or possibly multivalent, that will contain material that will add protection against these new variants. The bottom line of all of this is, Dr. Hamilton, that if you can get enough people vaccinated, then the variants will have nowhere to go, because the virus has to have a live host. And if we have enough people who are vaccinated, then the variants are not going to have any place to go, and they won't be of much concern to us at all.
That's a great response. Thank you for that. I actually did not know that. So whoever posed that question, great question, and I appreciate the response. Another question, will there be greater transparency from the district about new cases, quarantining procedures, and work from home? So for our panelists, I do daily, well, they're like not quite daily now, pretty much every other day, notification. In the beginning, we were criticized for not sharing when people were positive. Now we're being criticized for oversharing. But I will generally say we have 5 cases today. You've got 2 at school A, they're staff, student, and that's so people who are watching the state report card on the website have some sense of how we compare in terms of our reporting protocol. But there won't be any greater specification for that, because if we start getting to which classrooms, for example, then you're getting, in my estimation, to the point where you are compromising people's HIPAA rights. Because if I say 3rd grade class at such and such a school, and there's only 1 3rd grade class in that building, you've effectively identified that teacher. So the extent that the notifications are going on are about as specific as they can be at this time. And there are no plans to modify that at this juncture. If you give the vaccine to a child and he becomes paralyzed, who will be responsible, and what should the parent do? I have not heard of any cases like that. Dr. Hewitt?
I can address that. These are legitimate concerns. First and foremost, the vaccines are not yet approved for use in children. And so we really cannot administer the current vaccines to children. Now, if anyone is injured as a result of a vaccine, there's actually a national program that will provide coverage for the care of an individual who is injured if it is directly related to a vaccine. And so the person responsible, or the entity responsible, is the United States government. They actually will cover that. So hopefully this is not something that's going to happen, but if it does happen, it is covered by a national program that was put together in an effort to incentivize the various companies to continue to make vaccines, because many years ago, there was a lot of concern about litigation. And as a result of that, companies were not producing vaccines which were badly needed.
One of the things we are contemplating is putting 3-sided partitions on every student desk. So let's get to the efficacy of that and the 3 feet versus 6 feet. With more people inside the building daily, will the district mandate stricter protocols for cleaning the schools, and will the buildings be cleaned every day? So I'm going to ask Mr. Policio to take that, and then we're going to talk about the efficacy of whether or not air quality gets compromised, which was one of the things that I wanted to know before we made this investment in these petitions. Mr. Policio, in terms of a daily cleaning protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Good evening, everyone. So as we discussed earlier in an earlier presentation, the district is prepared and has an ongoing three-phase cleaning protocols. Phase one, and I worked with Dr. Lynch on this. Phase one, we do a daily wipe down of high-touch areas such as doorknobs and desks and chairs and cabinets, light switches. We do that before and after the students have arrived. And then once we're into the day, what Dr. Lynch has actually explained to us is we then give it a second cleaning with just clean water. We take any residue that we might have left behind with some of our disinfectants that we approved disinfectants. And then the final phase after the students have left for the day is we use an electrostatic sprayer to use, again, our very safe and effective cleaning solution to disinfect the areas, all the areas, classrooms, offices, and all the common areas.
And how do you ensure, Mr. Policio, that every building is following this protocol? What are our systems of accountability to ensure that our custodial staff is following this protocol consistently across the district?
Thank you again, Dr. Hamilton. We have a daily log, and we have it in each of the occupied spaces, classrooms, all of the restrooms, offices, and each and every time the custodial staff disinfects or cleans that area, we make an entry into that log, and the log is available for anyone to see.
Okay. So the guidance suggests that when 6 feet is not doable, that an appropriate protective barrier should be in place. And the way I interpret that is these partitions that have become very popular in addition to masks and face coverings. Can we talk about the efficacy of 3 feet, 6 feet with partitions, without partitions? Dr. Lynch, you want to start us off? Are the barriers helpful in mitigating potential infection? You're muted, Dr. Lynch.
So that's correct, Dr. Hamilton. The purpose of the partitions is actually a twofold purpose. It serves as an interceptor, if you will, for the larger droplet nuclei that can be released during speech, that may be released around a mask, or if for some reason a mask is temporarily removed by a student. The close distance between the area where the droplets would be released makes those partitions particularly helpful to intercept any projectile release of the larger droplets that may be released. The smaller aerosols that will also be released to some extent may be also ameliorated by the use of the barriers. This, again, still should be used in the context of masks, because masks really serve as the primary sort of source control and reduces how much is released at all into the air. Now, one of the questions that I know, Dr. Hamilton, that you were interested in was whether or not the presence of those partitions on desks will be likely to produce changes to air quality locally at the desk, or more broadly speaking, within the classroom. And so we were actually very interested in this question too. And so we ran some experiments where we tested air quality using carbon dioxide as a metric for ventilation airflow, generally within classrooms and specifically behind the partitions when a person was seated. What we learned is that with every exhaled breath, right now, every exhaled breath that I am exhaling as I'm speaking to you contains about 40,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. In well-ventilated classrooms, such as those which Mr. Policio is ensuring are maintained there at the school, and we can talk more about that at a later point in this conversation, you would anticipate that the airborne carbon dioxide levels would not exceed about 1,100 parts per million generally in the air. That corresponds to a good amount of outdoor ventilation. When we measured the change in carbon dioxide level within the breathing zone behind the partitions, we found that the maximum difference was only 25 to 40 parts per million carbon dioxide before it leveled off. So that gave us a great deal of confidence that that there is no significant adverse impact to the presence of those barriers. That's good news. So they serve a purpose, and we don't see any significant change in air quality locally there.
Great. Have you, Dr. Hewlett, Dr. Wong, have you seen, or Dr. Ma, what is your guidance in terms of 6 feet versus 3? Now, we all know 6 feet is better, but in order to get students back in school with some protective barrier, does that make sound, practical sense for students in a classroom?
So let me just comment on that. And actually, you know what, I wanted to step back for a minute, if it's okay, just in terms of, the return to school. And I think just to backtrack a little bit, when all of this started last spring, all the schools were shut down fairly abruptly, as you know, including yours. And so there really wasn't much experience, in terms of how safe the schools were, or exactly, what the risks were. And so what happened by this fall, when CDC issued some guidance and New York State issued some guidance, and the schools reopened, but to a limited extent, and they put a number of measures in place. But I think everybody was very conservative, including ourselves. So anytime there was a single student, a single teacher, a single staff in a classroom that tested positive for COVID, our routine procedures were really to exclude everybody else in that classroom, consider them to be exposed, and keep them out for, first 14 days and then 10 days before we allowed them to return. And I think we had a good semester's worth of experience, in the county. We also, CDC was able to observe, because there were schools opening all over the country. And what we noticed during that time was that the transmission within the classroom setting was very, very low. And so when we would see all these other students in the classroom, even though they were put on quarantine, they were monitored, they were tested, we did not see much, if any, transmission in that classroom setting. And so therefore, and I think the CDC has since put out this data, and there have been many other studies there, we definitely feel that the school classrooms are one of the safest places to be. And when there has been testing, the rates of the students in the schools, I think Dr. Ma mentioned at the beginning what the community rates were. And I can tell you almost uniformly, the positivity rates in different schools were actually lower than what they were in the community. And so based on all that experience, we do feel that there is a way to safely bring the children and the students, back into the classroom, and the teachers, everybody into the classroom. So I did want to sort of backtrack, and just sort of give an overall bigger picture in terms of the safety in the classroom. The recommendations, about the 6 feet distancing are based on healthcare data, where diseases that are spread, like Dr. Lynch mentioned, through these droplets, or similarly, they all seem to, or the majority of them, seem to fall to the ground, within a 6 foot radius, and therefore are not felt to be very likely to represent much of a risk. So I think that is where the recommendation comes from. The New York State recommendation does recommend, as does the CDC, the 6 foot distancing to the extent possible. They do give the option if that's not possible, because again, we do know that there's a space limitation, in most schools. in terms of bringing people back. And so if necessary, they have given schools the option of reducing the distance of less than 6 feet, but in New York State, they're requiring the use of these barriers. So one of the things that I wanted to say, though, is these barriers are like masks. I think, as Dr. Lynch pointed out, the masks are critical. And the fact that we did not see much spread of COVID in the classroom really is contingent on keeping a number of measures and precautions into place, which have been done so far. And so one of those, and one of the most important, is masking. Another one, is the social distancing to the extent possible. Another one is, as mentioned, the cleaning and the ventilation is another important factor. And another factor, which is we're trying to get going, is the vaccination of the teachers and the staff. And I think if all those measures continue, there is a way to have children return safely back to the classroom.
Great. One of the things that we have noticed in our cases, and we have reported several students being positive for COVID, but we have no evidence of that infection occurring in school, almost without exception. When contact tracers have been party to helping identify the source, we have found that that infection has happened outside of school, usually at some kind of social gathering or familial get-together, and that's been the source of contamination. So your statement about schools being safe is supported by the evidence. Dr. Ma, I saw your hand was up. If you want to unmute yourself, you have the floor.
I see in the chats there's a couple of comments about the fact that there is a population of Spanish-speaking people, and I wanted to, speak for them in terms of trying to figure out what we can do to reach out to the Spanish-speaking population.
Yes, so we are going to have a transcript of this meeting and then provide translation available. We could not figure out how to do it simultaneously. So we will be providing a transcript and translating it for our parents, and then moderating a Spanish speaking portion of this through that transcript. So thank you for raising that. Does the ventilation system use a filter with a rating of Merv 13 or higher for the air going into the classrooms? And has it been inspected or replaced recently? Mr. Policio, you and Dr. Lynch can respond to that best.
Thank you again, Dr. Hamilton. So I'm happy to report that the vast majority of all of our air handling units and rooftop units are fitted with Merv 13 filters, with the exception of a couple of the really older units that we had to go with Merv 11s because of the density of the Merv 13, and the air handling unit could not handle that density. We do change them 3 times a year. We change them at the beginning of school in September, October. They're due now in March, April, and then again in June, July. We inspect them regularly to see if there's any buildup of contaminants or dust on them. And if that happens to occur before the 3-month period, we efficiently and effectively change those immediately.
Great. How do you plan to protect students and staff while there are several cases a day? So it's actually not my job in that regard. This is a community effort, and the effort to keep people safe is our collective responsibility to make sure our students are accustomed to keeping their masks on, and to make sure we are respecting social distancing. Our responsibility is to make sure our filters are clean, our classrooms are being disinfected and sanitized, that we're providing appropriate PPE for staff and students, which we will do. So this is a collective effort. I want to be really clear that we recognize that the school, there's nothing special about what we do other than getting the support of our teachers and our parents and our students, not just Mount Vernon, but school districts across the nation where infection rates have been low because of the parameters that have been put in place and observed. So to the extent that we can ensure student and teacher safety is contingent upon each person doing their part to make sure that we are following the protocols that are put out by our experts in the fields. It is clearly our expectation that students and staff will wear masks. The only exclusion is when it's time to eat, where that even needs to be done under a structured environment. But other than that, students are expected to be wear their masks at all times. There was another question about when we plan to open schools. We are talking about an opening sometime between March and April. Again, the committee will make a recommendation, but my hope is that this recommendation will be consistent with that guidance. I do believe that at the end of the day, we're going to be just fine, but I can't guarantee you. The more people you have in one place, the probability statistically that changes the dynamics. But we can do everything we know to be safe. And it is a personal decision. We will still offer remote learning because we're going to need it. We will still need that as an option for some of our students. But the decision to send your child back to school is a family decision. You have to use the information that you have at your disposal to make a decision that's appropriate for you and your families. But our goal is to try to resume as much of our old normalcy as possible. What our new normal is going to be, I don't know. We'll work it out together. But I do know that we do a better job teaching kids when they're in front of us that versus students logging in, and the social aspect is so critical to our students. Mr. Glazer, in terms of the mental health of our students, we have a Wellness Wednesday where we provide opportunities for students and staff to check in. What data are you familiar with that would help us with making sure we are dividing appropriate time and attention to mental wellness for our staff and students as a result of this pandemic?
Well, thank you, Dr. Hamilton. I think the first part of the answer to that question is that issue is pretty much in the forefront of everybody's mind. How do we make sure we are okay? How do we make sure our kids are okay? And I think we're paying attention to it. The real question that we're facing is how do we access the resources that are necessary to help meet those needs? Here in Westchester County, through Project Hope, which was funded initially by the federal government and then through the state, we actually have a program in place where we have a helpline, a warm line for individuals with questions. I'll put the number up in the chat shortly, but as far as questions concerning mental health, and we know that there's an increase in need, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of depression, there's so much disruption, particularly for our children, of their everyday norms, that we need to pay close attention to it and reach out for the guidance and the help and support that we need. So the number to reach our wellness line is 995-1900, and I will put that up in the chat shortly. It is thank you. It is manned during the day by actual mental health clinicians, and if you call after hours, either someone will take it on call, which is what we're trying to do, or you will get a call back first thing in the morning.
Thank you. Even if the CDC update guidelines to 3 feet of distance between student, staff, et cetera, in most rooms, this will still not be possible if all students are in class. How will the reopening plan address this? Again, in many of our buildings, our classes are not large enough. That's why the guidance is 6 feet or appropriate protection. So that is the guidance we are using, and you've heard our experts speak to this. Some buildings have a population of over 500 faculty, staff, and students. How can the district adequately provide space for all? We will phase this in. We will look at our data. We will monitor through the help of Dr. Ma and our other experts. We will monitor how our data changes, if it changes, and make adjustments accordingly. Will there be plexiglass available for all students to place around their desk, even if they're, yes. Our goal is to make sure every desk has a plexiglass partition. Will students be able to take them home? No, they will remain in the classroom where they will be cleaned and disinfected each night with the classroom when the classrooms are cleaned. And of course, we need to maintain the inventory. So students will not be permitted to take them home. What will the district do if there is a potential super spreader situation? Great question. If there is a super spreader situation, the guidance is already there in terms of quarantining and how to help identify students and staff members who may have been in close proximity and potential exposure to COVID. We will continue our quarantining process where we will isolate classrooms. We will still have our isolation rooms. If we have a super spreader that requires a broader quarantine, meaning multiple classrooms or even a building, then we will do that if that is necessary. We will certainly not have evidence of a super spreader and not treat it as such. So that is where that is how we will address that. Dr. Wong?
Yeah, so I just want to interject, or maybe I can describe the process a little bit. When somebody tests positive for COVID, the routine procedures are for the school to notify us here at the health department. And our routine procedures are to basically take on and work together with the school. So the school's not doing this in a vacuum. They are working together with the health department and in consultation with us, where we identify who the other people we think who may have been exposed. And then we actually follow up. We interview the person or the family of the people who's tested positive. We interview and monitor the exposed people. And so hopefully, if there is a situation where we think somebody's infecting or exposing a large number of people, but I am going to tell you, we have not seen that in the school setting since September in any school here in Westchester, where, as Dr. Hamilton mentioned, in the unusual cases where we have seen more than one infected person within the classroom, almost invariably that person had an independent exposure from their family, from a social event, from something else. But we would work together with the school if we thought there was a problem. And as Dr. Hamilton mentioned, we would, if we felt it was necessary to quarantine people, or if we felt that it was necessary to put in more restrictive measures, maybe review the cleaning together, we would do all of that. So nobody's doing this in a vacuum. We're all in this together.
And I have to say, and proudly so, I have found the County Department of Health to be extremely helpful in this endeavor. I can say that the contact tracers have been on point. They have been responsive. Now, someone put in the chat that there have been folks who have not been contacted. There have been cases where I've heard people have not been contacted, and it's usually for one of two reasons. One is that by the time we get that contact tracing form, they're already at the end of the quarantine period. And therefore, contact tracers are working on more immediate cases. And secondly, oftentimes people don't recognize the number from the contact tracer, so they're not taking the calls. And I've had people say that. I've had contact tracers tell me, I've called these parents 3 or 4 times, and parents have said, oh, I didn't recognize the number. But I can say that I have found the department to be very, very responsive. When we've been getting calls over the weekend, even on holidays, I've been able to reach a live voice and get guidance, and I am very grateful for that. So any criticisms out there about the Department of Health that has not been my experience at all. And I have to say that kudos to this team of people who are here. Will there be a distance learning option in the 21-22 school year? Great question. I don't know what September will look like. My hope is that we will be able to phase that out. It is very difficult to manage in-person instruction and virtual instruction simultaneously. There's a cost in many instances associated with that. So I would like to see us phase that out based on what I know and understand today. Infection rates could change, COVID could change. A lot of mitigating factors could change between now and September that I can't anticipate and don't know anything about. But it is my hope that we will not be talking about remote instruction in September. But if we have to, we have to. It is what it is. But that's not my guide. Is there a state rush to reopen school versus having schools continue remote 100% or hybrid until the end of the 2021 school year, allowing more time for families to gain vaccines if they choose? I don't feel that there is a state rush. I think the availability of the vaccine has made it more advisable to open, but there has been no edict that I'm aware of that schools must open. Dr. Wong, Dr. Hewlett, any other information on that, or Dr. Ma that you may be familiar with?
No, I don't think there's any specific directive. I think what everyone is interested in, to the extent possible, is to have in-person instruction resume to the extent as possible for the benefit of the children. And of course, paramount, in doing that is ensuring that this is done safely. And I think that's what we're all really working towards. But we do believe that we can be definitely moving in that direction.
Absolutely. Is there a push being driven by state testing or state funding? No, our state funding is not related to whether or not we are open or not. There are CARES funds that have helped to offset some of the unanticipated expenses that districts across the nation have experienced as a result of COVID, but our funding is not, we don't get any more, any less money by opening or not. So there is no relationship to state funding and schools. What are the options for parents who do not wish for their children to attend school physically in person right now? Right now, as I mentioned, we will continue to offer remote instruction to some extent, but it will not be as broadly available as it is now, obviously, because we do want to get as many students back in as possible. How did this district justify a push to open when many of our most vulnerable families are still at risk? Again, students are safer in school. Our students need to be in school. I am very concerned about what I call the COVID slide in terms of students experiencing regression, academic regression as a result of COVID. So we certainly want to try to mitigate that to the extent possible. But I will say this is Ken Hamilton speaking now. This is not our experts. I think there will be, there's going to be time before we really figure out what the total academic implications are on students from COVID. I don't think it's something you're going to make up in an after-school program or in a Saturday program. A combination of those things will certainly help as we look at a non-traditional school calendar. But I think it's going to take some time for us to really figure out how our children have been impacted. How effective has remote instruction been? There's a difference in students being present and being engaged in remote learning. So we're going to have to really navigate our way through this to get our students back on track. Does the district plan to alter the notification process? I actually answered that one already. So many of the questions that I'm seeing here are, here's a question I'll take. Shortage in staff due to quarantining in our schools is an ongoing issue. Do you anticipate that the guidelines for quarantining will also change when the schools reopen for all students? I don't know that the guidance will change in terms of quarantining. If the CDC recommended 14 days and now they're at 10, could more people as more people get vaccinated, could that change? I guess that's possible. Maybe there will be less quarantining or shorter periods of quarantining as more people become quarantined and less opportunity for infection occurs. I guess that's possible, but that's not something that we would do independent of expert guidance by the CDC, the State Department of Health, or County Department of Health. We have every intention on having summer school this year. I expect it will be broad, a broader enrollment than normal. I'm actually hearing that the state is contemplating requiring summer school. I don't know if that's true. That's just scuttlebutt among my colleagues. But even absent that kind of directive or opportunity from the state, I think we should absolutely be looking at a greater enrollment for summer school. I would encourage parents. I'm not saying our students don't need a break. Of course they do. Our teachers need a break. We need to take advantage of opportunities for respite care over the summer. But likewise, we do need to make sure that our students are getting as much caught up on instruction as possible. Can you help us understand why the Department of Health has not contacted many of the staff that were enclosed? I addressed that already. Okay, now we have some live questions. How are we doing on time? We're good here. We have some live questions that are coming in that I'd like to respond to. Dr. Lynch, in terms of air quality, I want to go back to air quality again, because we have some of our staff members primarily are concerned about windows that need to be opened. And Michael, you can address this as well. The temperature in some of our rooms, I think we've done a great job with regulating that. But should we keep windows and doors open in the classroom with the masks and with the plexiglass partitions?
So I can speak to that, Dr. Hamilton. The CDC from the beginning, as the initial guidance was released, almost a year ago, has continuously maintained that ventilation should be increased as much as possible. You should be, at a minimum meeting the ASHRAE 62 guidance of 15 cubic feet per minute per person of outdoor air to dilute contaminants that are generated indoors. But it goes further to say that classroom outdoor air ventilation should be increased beyond that to the maximum extent possible. And they encourage, and I specifically encourage the district to continue to keep classroom windows open when it's safe to do so. Now, the advantage of that, given the timing of your reopening now, is that as we move into the second half of March and into April, outdoor temperatures are starting to increase. A lot of districts that we've been working with have been having in-person instruction even through the winter. And as we've modified ventilation rates, we've increased damper positions to increase outdoor air introduction. That stresses the air handling system. It makes the filter changes that Mr. Policio was talking about have to often happen more frequently because you're actually bringing in more debris, and good districts are monitoring that. But keeping windows open even in the winter is important. But I'm optimistic that because of the timing here, it will be less uncomfortable to keep those windows open. And we think that a few windows open in the typical classroom, at both ends and maybe in the middle, helps facilitate airflow. In terms of doors, the CDC also recommends cohorting to the extent that's possible. And what we've seen in some of our evaluations in buildings is that often when hallway doors are open, depending on wind pressures and things like that, you can actually get flow from one room across the hallway to another, depending on wind. So I really recommend that doors be closed. I think that classroom doors should actually be closed so that you actually increase your cohort, sort of protection and reduce sort of the migration of air from classroom to classroom. And so we generally recommend those things, as well as routine monitoring of the air quality to verify that things are working well.
Great. So there's a question, Dr. Lynch, that has Dr. Lynch been in our schools? He has absolutely been in our schools. In fact, I have a report that Dr. Lynch shared with me as recently as last week, I think it was, when this, I asked him to come in and test the air quality in our room. So if you want to just talk to us about your role in the district.
Well, for several years, we've done air quality inspections in the schools and worked with really closely with Mr. Policio's office to try to align the ventilation rates with those guidelines that we've already talked about. And I'll say that over the years we've identified issues, and a lot of those issues have been subjects of a lot of the upgrades that you've seen there in the district. There's been a lot of significant upgrades to the system. We think that that's important to continue, particularly now in this transition period, and we're prepared to do that. And that's just a continuum to the preventative maintenance and routine air quality monitoring program that we've established. But as we move forward in COVID, as we are doing with other districts, we focus the way that we think about it in the context of increasing ventilation as much as possible, given the social distance restrictions that we're also working with.
Great. Another question for our medical physicians. Are there records of contracting COVID after the vaccine? And will there be a mandate for in-person staff members to be vaccinated? If not, why? Well, right now we're not allowed to. The law does not permit us to require staff to be vaccinated. That could change, but I don't see it really changing. Right now, we are not permitted to require staff to be vaccinated. But are there records of folks being positive with COVID after the vaccine?
Yes, Dr. Hamilton, there have been cases of that occurring. We should keep in mind that sometimes people who get their first dose of the vaccine might actually be incubating the infection at the time of that first dose. And likewise, it should be kept in mind that we only get partial protection after the first dose. And so certainly there have been cases of individuals who have become infected and become positive after receiving that first dose. The vaccines are 94 to 95% effective, but there are going to be cases like that. The other thing that we should keep in mind is that the trials that were set up for these vaccines were set up to show that the vaccines prevent serious symptomatic disease. We still don't have all the data that we need to show that infection is actually prevented. And so it certainly is possible for a person to have asymptomatic infection, yet not have any symptoms. But that's something that we hope as we get more and more data, we'll be able to show that the vaccines are actually effective in that way as well.
Great, thank you.
So the other thing I just wanted to add to that is after you complete your vaccination, it still takes a couple of weeks. It's not instantaneous for the immunity to build up. And so there certainly are reports sort of in that interval. And just like Dr. Hewlett said, if you've already been exposed and infected before that, you go through that 2-week period, it certainly is possible. The other thing that, we just want to say is even with 95% efficacy, which is probably about the highest of almost any vaccine I've ever heard of. When you're talking about tens and thousands, hundreds and thousands, millions of people, the 5% can still translate into a number. So yes, we are going to hear about people who did get, infected after getting the vaccine.
And if I can put in one further plug, I think that it is important, even after people have been vaccinated, they still need to wear the masks. They still need to exercise the precautions. At our centers for vaccinations over the weekend, a lot of people were under the assumption that they were protected immediately, and that's of course not the case, as Dr. Wong mentioned. And we really want people to try to, we're actually discouraging people from traveling the day after they have the vaccination.
on the use of tents and heaters. Heaters pose fire risk, and if they are propane heaters. So we have been having conversations about looking at outdoor options as schools, as our students come back. We are not considering putting heaters in tents. I don't even need an expert to respond on that. I just don't think that's safe no matter how you slice it. So we have no intention of putting heaters in classroom space outside at this juncture. Now, I may eat my words come winter 2021 if there's some new information out there that I'm not privy to right now, but I just can't even imagine what it would be like to have heaters and electricity and tents. And I know people do that for large outdoor events of the sort, but that is not something that's on our radar right now. Will busing be provided? Any students who are currently eligible for busing, because they have an IEP, for example, will of course still be provided their busing. Our busing contractors have very stringent guidance in terms of how busing is provided, because obviously because of the close space there. Now, I don't know what the new guidance is for bus companies relative to how they space students out on that. Michael, have you heard anything from our bus providers?
The guidance is still the same. We try to use every other seat. They do have barriers in some of the buses, and there's PPE available for the students and the driver and the monitor.
Okay. Rick, I know you're monitoring Facebook. I want to devote equal time to folks who are on Facebook as well as those who are here on the webinar. In terms of is the school opening to full capacity? That is hopeful. The committee will ultimately have a recommendation for us in terms of what that will look like. But again, remote learning will still be an option for our students, because we have to anticipate that there will still be students that will experience social gatherings and teachers who will experience social interactions where they may become infected and require some quarantining. And we do not want to halt instruction in those instances. So yes, remote instruction will remain an option. Rick, you want to share some of the Facebook comments?
Yeah, Dr. Hamilton, will adults who are vaccinated be excused from being quarantined?
Right now, that is not the guidance, that they should also be quarantined. Or is that changing? Dr. Wong, Dr. Hewlett, is that guidance changing?
So the CDC has, posted some guidance for people who are at least 2 weeks, after completing their vaccine series, that if they are exposed to a case, they have indicated that those people no longer need to be quarantined. But going back to what I said before, the CDC does not have authority over the states. So each of the 50 states has to really adopt what they are. Many of you may have seen the governor and the state health commissioner, Dr. Zucker, both, they did issue a press release saying that they do plan to revise the quarantine guidance after being exposed to another infected individual. But in order for that to take effect in New York, they have to issue written guidance. So they either have to issue some regulations, they have to issue an executive order, and that has not been done yet, but they have expressed that they do plan to do that. So that may be changing, so stay tuned.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Dr. Hamilton, can we talk a little bit more about the partitions? Is the district going to purchase them? Who will be responsible for cleaning them? I know in other districts, kids are taking them back and forth with them. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I know in some of the neighboring districts, even when on my way into work, I do see students carrying their petitions. We will be purchasing the petitions. They will remain in school, and the district will be responsible for using the cleaning system that we have in place to clean those petitions daily.
Okay. Dr. Hamilton, some parents received a letter that their child will be marked absent if they don't attend school once we have reopened. Is this the case?
Well, a student is only marked present if they are present, meaning they have to log in. Schoology, which is our instructional format for distance learning, must sign in to be present. If a student does not sign in and is not physically in a classroom, that student will be marked absent. Absolutely.
What is the protocol for special needs students who are unable to wear a face mask?
Students who are not able to wear face masks should take full advantage of the remote option. In my estimation, students who cannot wear face masks because of a learning disability should not be encouraged for in-person instruction at this time. Do our doctors disagree with that, that guidance?
That's a difficult issue. I know that some students we have heard who have emotional types of problems, they actually do very well if they have the routine of being able to go into the class. But obviously, from the standpoint of the other students and the public health issues, that all has to be weighed in. But I can't really comment on it further.
And I would agree with Dr. Hewlett that it's really not a blanket statement. You know, at the health department, in our department, and other places, we have individuals on a case-by-case basis who can help families figure out the best way forward for their child. And, you know, we're happy, and the Department of Health is happy to try and assist with those things. So yeah, it's always a difficult question, but as we all know, each child probably has a slightly different answer.
Yeah, it's good to know that there is this assistance available for families, because even as I look at some of the questions in the Q&A, I can see the parents are divided. Some parents don't think we should open, which is the same way it was when we conducted our initial survey. Community was split, but I just want to encourage parents to acknowledge, to understand that it is a personal decision in terms of your comfortability. Eventually, when we get to a point where the likelihood of reducing infection is smaller and smaller, we'll again phase out remote learning. But in the meantime, do what's best for your family. Use the information that is available to you. Use the experts that are available to ask questions that help you make the right decision for your family, your circumstances. If you have health compromised or immunocompromised people in your family, your decision may be very different from someone whose circumstances don't fit that criteria. So you have to use that kind of information, but let it be a family decision about what works best for you. Go ahead, Rick, I'm sorry.
Do we have any information about individuals contracting COVID after they received the vaccine?
Yes, the doctor just spoke on it. He just responded to that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. How is the district going to monitor air quality from day to day? And then with that, will the district contemplate purchasing portable air purifiers for classrooms?
We have not explored that. I can't even imagine what that expense would look like. But Dr. Lynch has actually kind of rendered his advice on consistent checks and monitors about air quality as students come back. Dr. Lynch, you want to talk about that? You're muted. There you go.
Thank you. We think it's important that the district, again, optimize fresh air introduction, and as part of the sort of maintenance of that, routine air quality checks. And we have ways of doing monitoring that sort of can tell when students are in the classrooms what kind of airflow rates are being introduced, both from operable windows as well as the combined effect of those with the mechanical ventilation systems. And we're prepared, again, to work with the district to do that. That on top of the daily checks that your facilities staff are doing in the classrooms with respect to ensuring ventilation systems are running, inspecting damper positions, inspecting filter quality and things like that. Mr. Policio, if you want to speak more to the sort of the quality control system.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. So there is no mechanism in place to actually monitor air on a day-to-day basis. So we do it through our global system of air handling and rooftop units, making sure that we have dense filters in there, making sure that the motors in our unit ventilators are operating. I do have a very extensive BMS, a building monitoring system in my office, so I can monitor temperatures. It's not a perfect system. We find anything that is askew and we immediately respond to it and do whatever remediation, including bringing you in and if we need to do those types of checks. So we're prepared to do all of it.
Great, awesome. Other questions? Oh, Dr. Ma, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Please jump in.
All right. Just for everybody else's information, my other district, Southern Westchester BOCES, has much more of a population of children who cannot wear masks, and they are managing to have classes ongoing with teachers and distancing if possible, and maximum PPE for the teachers.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, since the kids are not able to maintain a mask on and they drool, and so there's bodily fluids, but they manage with frequent changes of gloves and masks.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yes.
So that,
Dr. Hamilton,
yes.
if I may. As you know, Dr. Hamilton, the therapeutic community of teachers have been fitted for N95 masks. They are all fitted. The masks are on site. And we do have the external shields if anybody has any issues with wearing their masks. So we're confident, as Dr. Hamilton has said many times, that we'll be able to accommodate all of those students.
Yes, very good. Rick?
Dr. Hamilton, what is the status of the isolation rooms in terms of providing staff for them across the district?
We have been pretty successful with managing the isolation room. We've had very few instances where we've had to utilize them, fortunately. But in instances where we have onboarded several staff members whose jobs are exclusively to monitor the isolation rooms. And in instances where there isn't a designated staff person, our nurses have been able to facilitate that supervision. As we reopen, there may be greater need for the isolation room, and we'll have to look at that at on a building by building basis. But that's a great question.
Can we talk about lunchtime for some of our students, sir, and what that'll look like as the district moves to reopening?
So we have a great, if you go on our website there and you look at our reopening plan, we have some videos of what the lunchroom will look like. Mount Vernon High, for example, has done a great job, in my estimation, as all of our schools have, with social distancing. But I am also looking to see where students are not sitting at cafeteria tables, and if so, that they are appropriately spaced out. Not every building will be able to put desks, individual desks and chairs in the cafeteria like Mount Vernon High has done, for example. But I also think that to the extent that we can have students in the cafeteria and maintain social distancing recommended with partitions, we will be able to do that. Where our cafeteria tables, for example, will be able to accommodate partitions, we'll need to look at having a sufficient supply to be able to accommodate students sitting at those bench-like tables in the cafeteria as well.
Will teachers be supported if there are real concerns regarding their safety and emotional well-being?
I'm sorry, say that again.
How will teachers be supported if there are real concerns regarding their safety and emotional well-being?
Teachers will continue to be supported. We have offered services to teachers by way of the employee assistance program if they've experienced anxiety. We have certainly made appropriate accommodations for teachers. In fact, I think we've probably been very generous and liberal in some of our efforts to accommodate staff. But we are, and many of our other districts have not been as accommodating, frankly, as we have. But I recognize that many of our teachers do have issues that cause them to have significant concern and trepidation. So we will, to the extent possible, accommodate them. But we are going to be following the guidance that is available to us by way of legal counsel and by the governor's executive order. That will help guide our reopening plan.
What will be the options for remote learning for students with underlying conditions, both in terms of the late spring and then going into the fall?
I'm really going to reserve the fall because I don't know what the fall is going to look like. And I want to really be clear about, I don't want to make commitments and not know what we can expect as a community come the fall. But as we look at reopening now in the spring, I think students that need to take advantage of the remote option will still be able to do that. I see someone who anonymously is on the chat and says something about, I seem to be waffling between kids coming back and not. I want kids to come back to school, so I'm not waffling about that. I want to be very clear. I want kids to come back to school. I think students should be back in school. At the same time, however, I know that we will not be able to stop remote instruction altogether because there will still be a need for it. So parents who are not ready to send their students back right now will still have remote instruction as an option. But we certainly want to put measures in place that reduce anxiety about students coming back so that more of our students will come back for in-person instruction.
Let's see. When will the district begin testing students on site? I know we had talked about it earlier this calendar year.
We have a partnership right now with the neighborhood health center. They test our athletes. They're certainly available to test students. We'll be looking at how we might be able to have a more definitive plan once we get our students back in and we see how readily available test kits are for students. I don't think we'll get to the point where we will be doing broad testing, but I do think for students who may be quarantining or events that, like today, we talked about whether or not we're going to do prom, or whether or not we'll do graduation. What will that look like? I don't have a complete answer to that, but that may be one way we start to look at having stronger protocols relative to our surveillance testing in order to bring those things back, hopefully by spring.
What do you think state testing will look like? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
What do you think state testing will look like later this spring and then moving into June for the Regents exams for our high school students?
I think we can expect that there's likely going to be state testing this year. I think that the data that we get from that state testing will not necessarily be about how much progress students have made, but will be our benchmark for how we plan strategic instructional strategies strategically for moving forward. So it'll be more diagnostic in nature than what we're accustomed to in terms of it being a summative assessment of how our students have performed all year long. That's my take on it in terms of how I think we can best utilize state testing. But I do think we need some indicator in order to appropriately plan for our students.
Some parents received an email stating that there will be no summer school and that any student failing will have to repeat that grade. Can you please provide some correction to that?
That is completely not true. There will be summer school. And I don't know where that email would have come from. I'd like to see that. So if whoever that person is would like to forward that email to me, I'd like to see it and clarify that.
Thank you. What about children in gym classes and physical activity at school, like recess? Do they have to wear masks in those situations as well?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to ask Dr. Wong if she would take that in terms of what PE classes look like. Right now, we've been able to provide PE in the classroom. Because our in-person population is so small right now, we've even been able to do that in the gym in the gymnasiums with social distancing, and it's worked out very well. What is the guidance on PE, on physical education classes once we get more students in?
Well, I think as Dr. Lynch pointed out, the good news is the weather is only going to get warmer and give us more opportunity to be able to do things outside. And just as a general principle, outside is always safer, and if you have the option, than indoors. And so for the outdoor, I mean, I think in general, if masks can be worn for the physical activity, it's always recommended. And as you've seen, even for some of the sports, masking is being recommended. Again, if the key there is both the masking, being outdoors, and also just the space that they're in. As you noted, gymnasiums, fortunately, are generally larger spaces, certainly much larger than a classroom. And so, if students can distance, if they can keep their masks, on, that is always the safest thing to do. And of course, outdoors is even safer than indoors. But that being said, there are certain, situations where the mask might not be safe. And of course, we don't, want that don't want that situation at all.
Great. Well, it looks like the questions are becoming more redundant in terms of repeating things that we've already said in different iterations. So I just want to give you an opportunity to just give us some closing comments, thoughts, or anything that you wanted to share that did not come up that may be of the benefit from our group. And then we can close out our session tonight. So Dr. Ma, I'll begin with you. If there's anything you'd like to share, closing thoughts.
I am guardedly optimistic that we are going to be safe in opening as long as we keep this social distancing, masking, and people using PPE. Because I not only do I deal with the students, I also deal with the faculty in terms of helping to decide accommodations, and sometimes it is the physical that gives you limitations, but sometimes it is also the mental health aspect that it's understandable that in this pandemic people have all kinds of concerns that are accentuated by isolation. But I think that with people getting vaccinated, even though you cannot mandate, I think it is now opening up to teachers to be vaccinated should they wish to be vaccinated. So that is an option. And I do feel guardedly optimistic.
Great, thank you for that. Dr. Hewlett?
I'll just put in a plug. Again, it's been an honor to be on this panel. One of the questions that I saw was whether children can become seriously ill as a result of COVID, and the answer is yes. There is this syndrome called the Multisystem Inflammatory syndrome that has hit over 2,000 children nationally. This is a life-threatening condition. There have been 30 children across the country who have died as a result of this infection and this inflammatory process. In nearly all of these cases, the children probably got their infection from someone else in the household, and the condition occurred 4 weeks to 6 weeks afterwards. And so this is one of the places where we put in a plug for vaccination, because the children have to be protected by those around them until we have a vaccine that is approved for use in children. So I just wanted to end on that note.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. Dr. Wang.
Yeah, again, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity, to be on this panel and to be able to speak. And I think I just want to reiterate again, everything is a benefit risk sort of analysis. And I think all of us feel that the benefits of in-person instruction and being back in the school, that the benefits outweigh the risks, at this point. I do think that we do have information at this point that show that it's certainly possible to bring students back and for it still to be safe for both the children and also the teachers and the staff. And again, as we said, the transmission rates in the school seem to be much lower than what we're seeing out in the community. And so we therefore do feel that the school classroom is one of the safer places for people to see. And so we really want people to consider that.
Great, thank you. Michael P.
I just want to say it's an honor to be part of this team, and under your leadership, Dr. Hamilton, your directions contain no ambiguity, and I think we can really do this and do it successfully.
Thank you for that. Dr. Lynch.
Well-maintained schools are ventilated far better than well-maintained homes. The ventilation rates that are designed into home ventilation systems are really based on energy efficiency, whereas schools are more focused on ventilation and dilution. And so the work that the district is doing needs to continue. It's a layered approach: ventilation, use of masks, social distancing, enhanced cleaning and disinfection, supplemental systems, scheduling. All of the things that we've talked about here represent a mosaic of protective measures that make this system work. I encourage everyone here, whether you're at home or in the district, to remain vigilant. It is important that that even as you get vaccine, and I've received both doses, that we maintain our diligence in all of these things. And as we do that, we can help this district, like others, safely reopen, but it requires a continued effort.
Great, thank you very much. And Mr. Glazer.
Dr. Hamilton, on behalf of County Executive George Latimer and also Health Commissioner Sherlita Amler, I just want to thank you for including us in this program. I think it's wonderful that you have reached out and worked with your community as closely as you have. You are to be lauded for the work that you have done to keep all of this moving forward together. We're greatly appreciative of the work you're doing, of the hours that all of you and your staff have put in. And it means a great deal for us who are dealing with this on the health side to know we have such good partners on the education side.
Thank you so much for that. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, but a special thank you to our panelists. As you can imagine, to have such distinguished people join our call this evening is no easy feat, but your cooperation and your willingness to avail yourself for the community this evening is greatly appreciated. I think it was very informative. I hope our community has found it to be as informative. I learned tonight as well, frankly, and I know the committee, those members of our committee have been on as well. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. I wish you the best of health, be well, and to our Spanish-speaking parents that are online, we will get this information to you so that you can also have this information at your ready. So thank you, be safe, be well, and good night.